So first, we have to address the elephant in the room, which is the objection of, but Leo, politics is such a dirty and anti-spiritual topic. It's filled with ego. Isn't it just a distraction? I mean, after all, if you just work on yourself, you turn inwards, you become awakened, you just do your spiritual practice, and that will solve all the world's problems. Leo, the world's problems aren't real. They're just imaginary. Like you said, it's just a dream. So why talk about politics? Well, this is precisely false. The world's problems, contrary to what many spiritual teachers will try to teach you, cannot be solved merely by turning inwards. If only if it was that easy. See, there's an individual layer to our problems, and there's a collective layer to our problems. And generally, traditional spiritual schools do a pretty good job of helping us to fix our individual problems, but not our collective problems. And in fact, they contribute deeply to our collective problems. And one of the ways you contribute to our collective problems is by denying that we have collective problems, or by trying to reduce all collective problems to simply individual problems. So this is one of the first traps. And of course, there's also a trap of conflating the absolute with the relative, thinking that just because you become conscious of some absolute truth, some awakening thing, that automatically means that now your politics are going to be in order. Not at all. Not at all. These are different domains. Now, there's important lessons that we need to bring in from the absolute domain into the relative, but we got to be careful about how we do it. We don't want to just do a simplistic conflation here. And in fact, if you take the position that spirituality and politics should be two totally distinct fields unrelated to each other, notice that that itself is a dualistic position, because you're creating a boundary or a duality between the two. And of course, as you should understand, what non-duality teaches us is that everything is interconnected. When things are interconnected, but then you artificially separate them, problems result. See? So actually, if you think that you're being non-dual by avoiding politics, you're actually being dual. The non-dual position would be to understand just how important politics is towards the raising of the consciousness of society and of individuals. It's a lot easier to raise the consciousness of an individual when he or she is living in a higher consciousness society, and when the society and culture as a whole is not toxic, overly materialistic and dualistic and dogmatic and ideological and filled with cults and filled with partisan politics and dysfunctions and pathologies of various kinds. See? So there's a very important interplay between the two. And if the goal, as the goal is, for example, with Buddhists, is to be a bodhisattva and to help to enlighten the whole world, if that's your true goal as a Buddhist, you got to take politics and government very seriously, because you're not going to be able to do it one individual at a time. See? There are social, systemic problems at work here, which meditation and enlightenment alone will never fix. As important as meditation and enlightenment are. So you got to be careful not to just say that everything is a societal problem, because of course that's not true. You have to take responsibility and develop yourself. That's extremely important. But we also have to acknowledge these systemic problems. When the most conscious people refuse to engage in politics and government because they think to themselves that, oh, well, I'm above all this egoic, dirty nonsense, what ends up happening is that the most unconscious people end up prevailing and taking power. And then they end up governing you. And you see how this is backwards? We actually need the most conscious people to be our leaders, our politicians, our community organizers, precisely because it's the consciousness that they have and the levels of awakening that they've attained. That is what's going to save the world. You can't get some egotistical, neurotic, pathological, deluded person to be in control of large groups of people placed in important positions. Otherwise, what you get is you get disaster. You get disaster. So be careful. You have a certain responsibility as being a human and part of a society. to not only wake yourself up, but then to help use that awakening to awaken the rest of the world. By doing nothing, the status quo prevails. You have to understand that with politics, you can't just sit this one out. You can't just say, oh, well, politics doesn't concern me, doesn't affect me. It does. No matter how much you deny it, it does. You can't even live in a cabin in the woods without politics affecting you, because your ability to live in those woods without getting harassed or oppressed or murdered depends upon you being in a country which protects you, which has police, which will have firefighters in case you have a fire in your kitchen in your cabin, which will supply you with food and roads and electricity and so forth so that you can live in that cabin with some sort of sewage system, you see? It's all very deeply interconnected. But we'll be getting more into that in a minute. So the status quo, if you do nothing, if you don't vote, if you don't take conscious politics seriously, is not that you get to ignore politics. The default position then is unconscious politics, which is what we mostly have today. And then you get all sorts of results that are not ideal. And what you really have is you have devilry run amok. It's important you understand the way in which I use the word devilry. I'm not using that word to demonize people, even though it might sound like it. I'm using that word as a technical word to signify deep, blind selfishness and egotism. Go check out my episode, What is the Devil?